I'm going to introduce the next 4 speakers who will be joining me on stage. I'll introduce them each one by one, just to ensure that we're able to acknowledge their bios and, of course, the representation that they have. From there, we'll give them a round of applause to welcome them. Our first speaker, representing SEFA, the Small Enterprise Finances institution, will join us to give us some insight to unpack what it is that we do see from a public sector point of view, especially when it comes to access to financing. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Tshepiso Kobile. Let me start with SAVCA. Ms. Tshepiso Kobile will join us as the CEO of the South African Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, helping us understand the environment when it comes to the private equity space, as well as the participation in that particular field and industry. We'll be joined by Mr. David Morobe, Executive General Manager at Business Partners, who has a wealth of experience in terms of funding and supporting small business enterprises. He'll give us some perspective from a business partner's point of view. Ms. Linda Maqoma, the President of the Association of the Advancement of Black Accountants, will also join us. Bean Counter Much herself also works as an accountant, as well as a consultant rather, with a strong passion for the advancement as well as ongoing development of women and transformation within the industry. And then we'll be joined by Head of Pre-Investments at SEFA, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, Ms. Tsholofelo Moemi, who will also join us to provide some feedback and insight into the participation of the public sector in contributing to financing. Please warmly welcome them all on stage as they do make their way up. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Morobe, I see you being a gentleman here, allowing all the ladies to make their way up on stage. Typically, we'd say that you'd be a rose amongst thorns, but there are no thorns in this room, so you're the sunflower amongst the roses. Fantastic. Again, I'm enlightened by the conversations as well as questions that we've actually had that have come up so far. So maybe as a precursor to some of the responses that we can share with you with our panelists, I'm keen for any of you in the room. One key challenge you faced as an entrepreneur when it comes to accessing finance. Feel free to shout it out. We'll jot notes. Feel free to shout it out, and that will actually help us in terms of understanding which organization, which background really speaks to the kind of support that you have. Biggest challenge in accessing credit or finance? Oh, now we went mute. Shout it out. There's no need for a mic. I'm happy for you to shout it out. Collateral? Perfect. Any challenges with managing or negotiating interest rates? Perfect. Feel free to shout it out. One word. Okay, we'll come to you in our Q&A session. But why we're saying this is, of course, to help bolster the thinking and the word cloud, perhaps, that we can create coming out of this particular panel discussion, to fully understand how best it is that we can address the needs that have been brought up. Collateral certainly comes up, understanding the regulatory processes, track record. See? Just needed a nudge. Thank you so much for that. Shout it out in that corner. Criteria for funding, knowledge, access to information, and knowledge. I do see you're mentioning a few themes there, ma'am, and we will get to them. But I guess as we are about to start this conversation, it's best that you do understand the various forms of funding that speak to that ladder that can assist us, and understanding that these different organizations, these various fields of access to funding, also come with their own level of criteria, perhaps collateral that might be required, equity and ownership changes and structures that might take place, and understanding how best you can manage credit facilities. I'll start with yourself, Mr. Morobe and Maqoma, just to assist us with a brief introduction. You've been in this industry for more than 2 decades, so you've really seen the evolution of not only SMME development in the country, but of course funding and financing models that are present, but even the innovative solutions that can come out of entrepreneurs themselves in terms of how they structure their businesses for sustainability. Very briefly, as you share an introduction with us on Business Partners, but more so your observations of the transitions that we've seen thus far, what stands out for you?
Thank you. I thought Strongina is going to give us a mic. Oh, do we have a mic here? Thank you.
Perfect. Have a mic?
Thank you. Thank you, Gugu. Yes, I've been in this space for a number of years. What I can say is that most funding institutions are intentional, and that applies to Business Partners as well, in making sure that there is access to finance for entrepreneurs across the board, including women entrepreneurs. I think for us, it's the challenge, so long as there is a challenge of inclusivity, so long as there's a challenge of equitable distribution of funds, I think we need to deliberate. And that's why, for us, we think it's important, it behoves us all to convene platforms such as this that we can talk, because whilst we have done a lot over the years, there's still a lot more that needs to be done. There is power in convening, and that power provides, as we convene, a catalyst for the right conversations. It is one that says, it helps us to mobilize key stakeholders such as we have here to dedicate more resources
100%.
towards funding for women entrepreneurs. And perhaps the last one is that we facilitate a productive dialogue amongst like-minded people to say, what can we do to make sure that we don't sit here 10 years later still facing the same challenges? Notwithstanding what has happened in the past, we need to shape the future and make sure that we can make that finance accessible to our women entrepreneurs.
100%. And we are aware that there are a few entrepreneurs that Business Partners has actually supported and funded in the past who are present here. So we will refer to some of their stories in just a moment. But as we make our way down, of course, to get some feedback from Tshepiso, representing a very different space, right, when it comes to private equity. And this is typically what Mambongi was highlighting, where there's a sense of anxiety around that particular space. But I'm glad to have you with us on the panel. And perhaps maybe we can share from your observations in terms of the progress that has been made when it comes to ensuring that we plug that gap for women to access funding opportunities, and more so from a nuanced view, given your experience and background within the private equity and venture capital space.
Thank you very much. Gugu, am I audible?
Is Tshepiso audible?
Yes. Okay,
Perfect.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone in the room today. I suppose from a SAVCA perspective, we have really looked at where we intervene based on observations from our end around the extent to which the fund management space and asset management spaces are transformed. And the reason for that is because we basically see capital as flowing in that sense, that ultimately a lot of the capital that goes into businesses, into projects, to a large extent is coming from, yes, the banks, but a very big pool of that is from our savings as a country. And if one looks at how that capital gets channeled, in essence, those savings get channeled through retirement funds, through pension funds. Those retirement pension funds ultimately allocate to various sectors, one of which is private markets, which we represent. And from private markets, then we've got fund managers who then channel those funds into businesses. So we then intervene in that space around saying, how do we intervene by making sure that the fund management space is transformed, and how do we advocate for that space so that investors increase their allocations into it? And the reason we advocate for that is because we are saying, if we've got more fund managers who are women, then that will ultimately influence how they channel money into businesses.
And maybe you can highlight this for us, because we're well aware that from a regulatory point of view, there have been some changes actually to encourage that capital. So these fund managers who decide how more capital can be allocated to SMMEs essentially have been incentivized from a regulatory point of view. Regulation 28, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. So Regulation 28 has increased thresholds in that our pension funds can now invest more of their capital into private equity, into private debt, into infrastructure. However, despite the regulation actually allowing for that, what we're seeing on the ground isn't quite there. Because the stats at the moment are that between 1% and 3% of pension fund allocations are actually in private markets. So we intervene in that space in terms of capital and attracting capital into private markets, and then we then advocate with our members and release data for around how well transformed our members are, because we believe if we drive more women-owned and managed fund managers, then that will ultimately flow into where they invest their money. Because when we engage with a lot of our fund managers, especially the women-owned and managed fund managers, they will tell us a multitude of challenges that they face around accessing capital. It's still harder for them to access capital compared to their
Is that primarily
male
because they are
counterparts.
just female?
Because so there is there's this stigma around track record, where, for example, and it was mentioned by one of the ladies earlier, so you will hear, for example, female fund managers saying, we might have worked in investment banks for years, but the minute we want to step out and establish our own funds, suddenly we are deemed to not have track record. So our intervention is in capacity building for fund managers, helping them formulate teams, helping them put together pitch documents, giving them visibility to investors, and running programs that basically try and circumvent this whole they don't have a track record story.
Got you. So many points that you've mentioned, and we will come back to them to resolve how these challenges are being mitigated within this environment. Apologies, we are experiencing a few technical issues, but it's nothing that we're not used to, right? We know technology is a friend, but it can be a fickle one at times. But as we do move the mic to Linda, thank you so much. And building up on some of the themes that have been mentioned, especially from what we've heard from Tshepiso, highlighting the challenges that female fund managers typically face, and in terms of not being backed as the jockey, people still referring to backing the horse, being the previous institutions that they might have worked through. This does speak to how best it is that we change that particular narrative and encourage a heightened level of active participation. Linda, this is a very interesting space, because not only do you work with people who work within the realm of numbers, accounting, finance, and making these key decisions, but they also know what the value chain looks like in terms of preparedness. But preparedness also needs the necessary capacity and the skills. As you take a look at this particular landscape from an ABASA point of view, what other impediments have you viewed and highlighted as key concerns restricting women from accessing capital?
Thank you, Gugu. I think as I was listening to Mambongi, I was like, this is my spirit animal,
Right.
creating the foundation of my response. ABASA is Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants, and what we have done to address the business side of things, linking to what you just said around sometimes you're within corporate and you work in a particular space, and then you want to venture out and start your own company or firm. Accountants also do the same thing. We train in your KPMGs and your Deloittes, but we want to start our own firms. But by the time you get there, your competitors are these big 4 or 5, or how many you want to say, those are your competitors. The challenge there is when you want access to the market that they pretty much monopolize, you need the capacity, you need the technology, you need all of that infrastructure to be able to compete at their level. And how are you going to do that as this one individual? So what ABASA has advocated for a couple of years is we currently have a ABASA Business Forum. It is a collaboration of all the smaller entities. And we go and we approach, for instance, your KPMGs to say, how do you work together with these particular firms so that they are able to get into the track record of auditing in financial services, because that's one of the impediments from a black perspective.
So in other words, leveraging their infrastructure, their support in order to make sure that you grow.
Yes, so I mean, it's what Mambongi was saying,
Yes.
that you need to hold these corporates accountable to say, you have the budgets to invest in some of these firms, but sometimes when they go knock as individuals, they don't get the response. But when an ABASA comes as a collective, and there's the power in, I mean, you're talking about power, and I'm talking about power in numbers and collaboration. The challenge then we then face is, are we willing to collaborate?
100%.
Because the power in us using vehicles such as ABASA, and I'm so happy that the CFO here is a chartered accountant, that's actually my member. So number one, you must pay your membership. Number two, the work that ABASA Business Forum is doing and branching into the enterprise development space is particularly to do that. We leverage with global organizations such as SAPRO and Makosi to give capacity in terms of talent. Some businesses can't carry the talent or the workforce that you need for a particular project that you'll get. So while we're trying to access the market, we must also be bringing the capacity. So we're saying, when you don't have the opportunity, you can't carry that workload. So there's a dual sort of, understanding of how a business works in order to help businesses. To say, sometimes that might not be about getting the funding, but how do we decrease your expenditure while you are looking for the opportunity? And once you get that opportunity through us journeying with you, how do we pair it with a funding and capacity that might not necessarily be in monetary form? So those are some of the, I'll stop there for now.
100%.
But there's a lot of work, but it all goes back to how are we collaborating for impact? How are business partners as financiers for entrepreneurs coming on board with an ABASA enterprise development to say, we can figure out how we can finance these guys, because you have their profiles, you have their capacity. These are guys coming from big organizations and they can do the work, but how do we capacitate them?
100%. Very important that we underscore some of these themes that are coming through before we do get some feedback from SEFA. Of course, making sure that we leverage the opportunities that exist through these professional bodies and forums that are present. Certainly the capital is there, is what we're hearing from Tshepiso. So it's just a matter of making sure that it is channeled through the right fields, given that the capital incentives are present. And of course, as Mr. Morobe has mentioned, also highlighting the fact that through the ongoing camaraderie and partnership, there are opportunities of highlighting this even further, especially when it comes to the various stages of business growth. And perhaps that's also important for us to highlight, because when we think of a startup, you're just hitting the ground running, you've bootstrapped, you've tapped into your pension fund, ask your father-in-law for some funding, your brothers, your friends, everyone else in the neighborhood, and then you think, okay, I might be stuck. Perhaps this is when SEFA is the organization that you need to call before you even attempt to do all of that. And this is where, again, Tsholofelo, you can help paint a picture, not only in terms of understanding the reality of the numbers that were quoted by Mambongi and our previous speakers here on stage, but also helping us understand how SEFA is literally there to plug in that gap for many South African entrepreneurs, specifically within the rural township space, but also female-facing, to actively get them to participate without going through the rigmarole of perhaps reducing their credit scores.
Thank you. I was listening to Mambongi and I thought that she reached out to me last night because every information she was.
So Mambongi goes basically. She's a living one. Yes.
Maybe just to give a background, I need to emphasize.
Please hold the mic closer. Thank you.
Maybe just to give background, I need to give statistics in terms of the numbers that SEFA has given out in terms of the loans for the past five years. In terms of the number of SMMEs, we funded 344 SMMEs, 44,000, I'm sorry, for 3.6 billion. I think, thinking in context of our population as women in South Africa, we must appreciate that this is nothing. We know that our population in the country is 62 million. 51% is women in our country, which means that at least more than 31 million exist in our country. And I think we also know the other dynamics in terms of the age group and other things. The income generated from the women-owned enterprises in our country from 2018 to 2022 is 175 billion. It's still nothing. With 972 jobs, 972,000 jobs. And I think we all appreciate it still means nothing to us as a country. And we must also appreciate that there are also some other issues like COVID, that impacted negatively in terms of our businesses. Some of the businesses were closed. Some of our margins, we couldn't achieve them because of COVID. Some of the businesses were shut down totally. You couldn't operate during this period. And this can also be attributed to some of the barriers that we experience as small businesses, that include communication skills, absence of mentorship, marketing, and holistic management training. And one of the issues that was also raised by the members is lack of information, access to information, which is key. Research conducted by the Competition Commission in 2018, they indicated that in terms of ownership of land, 13% of black women aged between 20 and 49% owned 13% of land. And 36% of men owned the land. You can only imagine, this number is terrible.
Yep.
Because I think we've all mentioned that when you go to the banks, they want collateral. While we hope that they can use other things, they don't take our furniture as collateral. They don't take our jewelry as collateral. They want the property. I can give you a typical example. My mother from my paternal side comes from Marapiani. There is a land in Marapiani. My grandmother passed away 20 years ago. I can't access that land because I'm married. I'm no longer Mamidze. The king there feels that, no. The person who must occupy that property must bear your father's surname. And because of that, that property is dormant. I can't develop that property. I can't even use that property to access more funding. Those are the issues that we're facing as women. Societal norms, customary issues, patriarchy is still there, still existing. And I like what you said, Bongi. Gender issues, they begin at home. we must start raising our boys at home to appreciate that it's an equal society.
Got you.
If at home as women we are still preaching that boys can't do the dishes, what are we saying as women?
Yeah.
These issues are going to flow directly into our business environment.
Got you. I'm going to take advantage of jumping in there because some of the stats that you've mentioned are really critical, right, in understanding the reality of the landscape that we're in. But as has been mentioned, we need to work on the how. And perhaps as we shift gears in this conversation to ensure that we offer you some tangible solutions, as you're sitting there, I can imagine as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, okay, which institution might be befitting for my growth? What is the criteria that I need to understand? And what is the level of preparedness that these organizations can assist me with? So in my mind, I'm thinking you're starting a business, you have some property to develop, perhaps dealing through some of the regulation and legislative challenges, you would start at a SEFA. Find some growth opportunities and continue to scale, and that's where you come to David at Business Partners for perhaps a more straightforward and direct approach, which might be tweaked to your nuances. ABASA as an organization, through its affiliation as well, will help you scale even further through the necessary partnerships with big conglomerates within the industry. And following that, if there's an opportunity then for even further growth and a buyout potentially, or equity partnership, this is where private equity comes into play. So I'm going to make our way around the panel just to actually speak to the practicalities of what is it that organizations or entrepreneurs need in order to adequately qualify, in order to access funding from SEFA, and how best you've adequately prepared them to manage that journey. So if anyone walks in cold and says, here's a business, here's my idea, what is it? What will it take, in other words, for them to get financing from SEFA? Let's start with yourself.
Okay. I need to brag about it. While at SEFA we don't have a specific program targeting women.
If you could move the mic closer. There we go.
Apologies. While at SEFA we don't have a specific program targeting women, all our programs were making it price incentive towards women, which means that any program within our organization, if you are a woman, if you are younger as a woman, our pricing model will be cheaper, will benefit you. But I think what we also need to appreciate is that pricing alone is not the only solution towards this problem.
Mm-hmm.
I can mention even another province, I don't want to mention it by name, and other countries, they're currently introducing what they call finance readiness programs. While we appreciate that information is one of the key challenges, the readiness of our businesses, one of the entrepreneurs, they mentioned the issue of finances, the issue of preparing financial reports for the business. The business is operating, but you don't have the financial reports. You don't have the management accounts. And therefore it becomes difficult as financier to come on board because I don't know exactly is this business making money?
And do you assist them as SEFA to say, Googs, these are your financials, but your numbers need to be reworked this way. Get an accountant, track the figures. This is what you should be including in your business proposal. And I'm really taking it back to basics because that's fundamentally where things need to be set in order for the growth to be propelled, right? Additional aspects of support that you typically provide for entrepreneurs in the funding phase?
I think emphasis right now is that mentorship is key, but I think we must move away from the norm mentorship where you allocate the mentorship to an entrepreneur who's working alone in the business, being a marketing company, financial company, things like that. They should rather work as a group. They group themselves as female entrepreneurs and they call speakers. They call Google and say, Google, can you come and present to us in terms of the finances, in terms of the marketing? What is the market? In terms of the market, it becomes easy for them. The same entrepreneurs, they can rotate in their businesses to share information, to exchange ideas. They end up not seeing each other as competition, but as a unit that can work together toward accessing markets, that can work together as providing linkages to information and other things.
100%. Very briefly, for the ladies in the audience, so that we put numbers on the table. When someone walks into SEFA's office, what range should we be anticipating when it comes to capital access that we require?
Between 50,000 and 15 million. They can access between 50,000 and 15 million. I need to confirm that women are accessing funding. The only challenge is that most women, they don't know that there are these programs available for them. There are these schemes available targeting for them. IDC, they have a dedicated scheme for women. NEF, they have a dedicated scheme for women. Less interest rate, blended finance where you get a portion of the grant, things like that. But women are not accessing these facilities. When they do, most of them, they are used for fronting purposes. When you engage with them, what are you doing in the business? They don't know anything about the business. The husband is running the business. That is not the intended purpose.
Got
We want
you.
them to be actively involved in the economy.
100%. I'm going to move the mic now to David so that we come to some of the practicalities on the ground that Business Partners has worked with, and so that we can walk away with clear understandings as to this straightforward approach that Business Partners does take is really one of building a relationship with the entrepreneur over the long term, right? Share some insight with us in terms of that journey of the preparedness, readiness, and some of the support that Business Partners does offer its entrepreneurs.
No, thank you very much. I think that preparedness, we leverage our technical assistance to get the entrepreneurs sometimes pre-investment, but mostly during and after the investment has been issued to the entrepreneur to make sure that they can walk the path. And I think we shared with you earlier on, there are a few of our entrepreneurs in the audience here that have actually experienced the value of that technical assistance. But what I want to raise is that there should be no difference, or there is no difference between men and women in terms of the likelihood of them getting access to finance from Business Partners.
Yep.
I think there are certain fundamentals that you want to be in place, and I think for all entrepreneurs that are seeking to get access to funds from potential funders, some of whom are sitting in the market, including SEFA, I think there are a few questions that they need to think through, because that would assist them also in communicating the language of the funder. First, what is the finance needed for?
Yep.
Okay, that will determine the amount of funding that is required by that entrepreneur. Is it a short-term or a long-term need? That will determine the term of the facility. Okay, and then what is it that you're prepared to give up in exchange for that capital? And that's where the challenge normally comes in, because that will yield the sort of requirements that you need to adhere to as an entrepreneur. And I think the issue of collateral has been raised. So we'll see, is it possible to have just debt finance come through if you have all the requirements required by the funder? In some instances, equity can be leveraged as the type of funding that would be suitable for you, depending on the type of opportunity that you have.
Quick one, if I can jump in there, because there still might be some of our participants who are wondering, well, hold on, I'm not comfortable with equity just yet, or I don't understand it, because again, many of these themes and levels of funding do come with the necessary technical understanding that is required. Have there been, I guess, changes or amendments that have been implemented by Business Partners to review alternative forms of collateral? And if so, what would they be?
We haven't gotten there yet. I listened to Bongi point out that we need to look at alternative forms of collateral. I never thought of jewelry as one
The
way.
handbags in the room, just look around, the shoes.
But maybe I'll share some of the initiatives that we are looking at. But the last point I wanted to raise in terms of talking that language is that what rate of return can be expected from the success of the business, because that will determine the cost of funding that that business can be able to afford to proceed with. So I think for us as business partners, I mentioned earlier on that we are very intentional about getting finance to women entrepreneurs. So we have included that in our measures of performance. All our teams that are here will indicate to you that say, yes, you've done well, but you only lend to one gender grouping. We want, if there's a target of 40%, it's a measure of performance they need to meet for them to be incentivized thereby, because it shapes the behavior that we would like to see come through and us reaching to those entrepreneurs. Two, we've adopted the International Finance Corporation way of looking at women's involvement in businesses at various levels. You have those that come at 51 to 100% ownership of the business. That is recognized, but not all of our lady or female entrepreneurs are at that point. Some of them are below the 51% threshold, but they have serious involvement in terms of the decision-making structures of those particular businesses. And that technical assistance can look at how we can grow that journey as we accelerate their path of being 100% owners if needs be, but sometimes they work with their spouses, but play a very key role that is not all the time ocular, and this is one thing that we look at. And then our teams here can attest to that. We deploy a lot of efforts at local levels to convene such stakeholder engagements, where we speak with like-minded individuals about what can be done to bring access to finance to our women entrepreneurs. And then maybe the last one that I think you will like is that we recognize the history of disempowerment. We recognize that there's not as much equitable share in access to funding as we would like to see. Therefore, the chief investment officer was supposed to be sitting here, assured me that we're looking at the blended fund. Because that blended fund, we can access resources because some of the blended fund contributors are perhaps not looking at the return on capital. They're coming in at a softer amount. That will help us to look at a pricing level that is probably more suitable for women. We can explore issues of the collateral that you're talking about to say perhaps we can be less robust, less harder if we have a blended fund that doesn't require so much of us. And we can look at perhaps a grant component. So he said to me, we're looking at probably getting it within the next fiscal 2025. I'm hoping that comes to bear. I'm putting him on the spot, even though I'm sitting here. But
definitely. We'll speak to Jeremy to make sure. Just to stay with you for a moment, though, David, I'm intrigued as well, because as you mentioned, perhaps these are components that might not exist within the individual organizations that we're representing. But does this highlight that if someone perhaps struggles with accessing grant funding from a business partners, that you do speak to a SEFA, a CEDA, and other players within the market, or direct that partnership, just to ensure that the entrepreneur is not left running from pillar to post with all these different requirements and knowledge that they have to absorb while still trying to keep a business going. So are we finding that as organizations, you are talking to each other to assist in directing entrepreneurs to the right spaces?
No, 100%. I was speaking to Tsholofelo earlier on. It behoves us to work together because we are like-minded. We want to assist and push that needle for entrepreneurship. So we have an Entrepreneurs Growth Center that will serve to direct entrepreneurs in areas where we as business partners perhaps are not able to assist the entrepreneur, to say, let's work with SEFA on this particular one. We have to look for opportunities for syndicated funding wherever it is possible, because you can then leverage the other funders in terms of the varied requirements that we have. SEFA might be looking at other things compared to what we look at. Maybe they look at more just job creation, which we should all be looking at. It could be just that their requirements in terms of collateral are less pronounced than what we have or the banks have, would be even on the far extreme. So yes, we do work with other funders, and the reason I have Sisbongi Kunene here, and I'm going to visit her frequently to see what we can unlock from the banking sector, the mainstream financing institutions as well.
100%. Thank you so much for that. And I think this is really important, because as you're sitting here as an entrepreneur, I'm hoping that you're taking and absorbing information to understand that you need to identify what kind of funding you need for the growth stage that you're at for your business. That will assist you in going to the right people and the right organizations. And even if you are there, as has been mentioned by our previous speakers before, ask them to help you and direct you to the right channels in terms of understanding the necessary criteria that you have to fulfill. I want us to jump now to private equity before we do come back to you, Linda, specifically on trust and building that level of trust, especially when it comes to leveraging off of the base of bigger corporates to assist your growth. But private equity, venture capital, typically met with a lot of anxiety in the market, because you think, what? You want to own a stake of my business, this baby that I birthed, created and crafted, and you want to come in, dictate terms and conditions that I just might not be comfortable with, so hold on, I'm not too keen on this. And this is an opportunity for us really, Tshepiso, not only to educate ourselves as entrepreneurs in the room, but even those of us who might have an understanding of private equity, to fully grasp the various stages of it and the preparedness that one actually needs to explore. And I think this is also an aspect that we do need to underscore, because private equity really is for organizations that have found a sustainable level of growth, no longer in the startup phase, unless you're talking about venture capital, but are really looking for that camaraderie and partnership with someone at their side, literally at the top of the business, to direct and craft the trajectory going forward. Talk to us about preparedness and how you're doing this from a SAVCA point of view.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gugu. You're absolutely right. And I think a big recognition on our part has been the fact that we have to spend more time educating everyone, so that everybody understands where VC and PE play in the evolution of a business, because they don't play at all stages. So a big part of our role has been around, firstly, putting out communication around building an ecosystem, because firstly, we believe that entrepreneurship does not operate in a vacuum. You know, it operates in an ecosystem that needs academia, that needs policymakers, that needs investors, fund managers. So it's a big ecosystem. So the extent to which we are able to formulate partnerships with players in that ecosystem becomes quite important. So that's the first thing we pay particular attention to. The second one is also recognizing that we need to communicate around where our members play, like I said.
Yes.
So if we think about the evolution of a business from when it starts off at very, very early stages where it needs seed capital to where it needs angel investors to come on board, to where it then starts generating a revenue stream, and then at a later stage, now it is profitable. It's important that business owners understand that private equity and VC need them to be post-revenue. And particularly private equity starts playing in the expansion phase.
Yes.
So VC growth and then private equity expansion, and then beyond that, then you can talk about the IPOs, etc. So it's important for businesses.
IPO, just for those initial public offering, which would speak to listing on the JSE.
Yes.
Just to make sure we don't get lost in the technical jargon.
And so it's important that we draw out that evolution so that everyone understands where our members play. It's also important, I think, to also emphasize that VC and PE, private equity and venture capital, also look for certain types of businesses. They will not fund every business. And the reason for that is because they must invest in accordance with the mandate from the investors. So their investors have a specific risk appetite, and that money must be returned back to pensioners. So the risk tolerance also has to match that. The term that they invest in has to match that. Their ability to exit this investment in 5 to 10 years is important. So they must actually be able to see the exit when they invest on day one and say, this is a business that when I invest in today, I can already see this line of sight into how I'll exit 10 years from now so that I give money back to the pension fund to pay out
100%.
their pensioner. So all of that is important. And I guess where we play in all of this is saying, firstly, we are part of the Startup Act movement because we want to create awareness around the fact that at the moment, as much as we've got a thriving entrepreneurship environment in South Africa, our entrepreneurs to a large extent don't stay because they grow, especially your high growth entrepreneur startups. They get to a certain point where they need more capital, but our regulatory environment makes it difficult for them to attract that capital, and then they have to relocate to different markets to be able to get that capital. So we spend a lot of time engaging with government around policies for startups, and particularly high growth startups, and what can be done there to make sure that they stay in the country, they get capital in the country and grow in the country. 100%. What we also do is we put out training on private equity and and VC, because we realize that it's important for entrepreneurs to get in the mind of a fund manager, to understand what they're looking for, how you should compile your pitch, how your business plan should look, what you should be thinking about when you go and present to them. So those are some of the interventions that we see as critical.
100%. I'm glad you mentioned this because there are some technicalities, of course, that would apply to it as it is perhaps viewed as a specialized form of funding. But as you mentioned, high growth businesses, some of us might be working within the educational space, manufacturing of materials, perhaps logistics, the services space. And we might be thinking, hold on, this is my baby, I birthed it. This is a high growth business. But it's imperative for us to also highlight what this is for the VC as well as a private equity space, because there's a different dynamic there. People, as you walk into their offices, they'll ask you, well, are you developing a unicorn? And you think, hold on, what? But there's specifics to it in terms of the kind of growth and how it's used to define the kind of businesses you're looking to identify.
Absolutely. Tech.
Okay.
Because the reality is that businesses are growing at a fast rate because technology enables them to grow at a fast rate. If you look at the makeup of our VC investments, so at the moment our members have invested about 1.3 billion in early stage businesses. And the biggest sector is technology driven. And it's not just tech in terms of software, it can be ed tech, prop tech, health tech, anything. So it can be basic services that we're using, but using technology platforms to accelerate them. So that's where we're seeing a lot of momentum in terms of where VCs are putting their money in. And I also want people to be at ease as well around bringing on board a VC or a PE, because what we think is especially important about private equity and venture capital is that you're not just getting monetary investment from them. These are people who are investing their know-how, their strategic guidance, their operational know-how. They are providing access to markets for the entrepreneurs that they support. So we see part of their value creation as really what sets them apart from other investment classes in that sense.
100%. I'm glad that you've emphasized this, because as we're sitting here and thinking about tech, how do we leverage it? Think of the examples that we currently have in South Africa's ecosystem of Sweep South, of course, Yoko, Naked Insurance, Pineapple Insurance. These are the companies that are perhaps best placed as examples for us to understand how it is that their growth has been propelled by this particular space of financing through venture capital as well as private equity. So that at least as an entrepreneur, you're sitting here identifying which space actually might speak to you. And what I find comforting is that essentially the capital is there. Our panel has made it very clear, the money is available. The support and additional structure of encouraging your business growth going forward is also made available, but needs to be underscored by trust. And this, Linda, is where I'm hoping you can come in to make sure that we build up on that. Trust was mentioned by, thank you, Mambongi earlier on. It's been brought up as well through various themes in the conversation with various participants in the audience. And to build up on that trust, to partner with a larger organization to ensure that as a small player, the jockey looking to hitch a ride on the big horse, you do have the necessary capability and capacity. Talk us through that additional support that's required. And most importantly, how best to leverage on that trust and build on it. Because sometimes as entrepreneurs, we might have a great opportunity, but might not have the capacity to fulfill it completely.
I think, particularly when you look at women, there's a confidence that it needs to be present for you to articulate the trust that you bring. So, I mean, when you asked, give me words that describe what the challenges are, and we are dead quiet. I can't see if I can trust any of you to represent me anyway, sorry. But I'm coming at this because we are very quiet as women, and to show up and the way we show up, and if we are backed by, I mean, there's a lot of compliance. When we speak, I mean, I also sit as the Vice President for Professionals at the Black Business Council. And what the Black Business Council has been doing is asking organizations such as SASOL and the JSE to host events where, firstly, we talk about access to funding. Number two, we also look at what are the requirements, what do they need from you as a small business owner to be able to actually bid for work in that particular organization. So the compliance part you must have, but exactly what Mambongi is saying, the way you show up, there's something about, you know, people can read that this person, I'd actually want to hear more about this business. So how do we help people to become more confident about their businesses and to say, you've really got something good here? Because sometimes, and especially as women, we have gold mines, we're sitting on gold, but we're not, you know, bold enough to come out and say, I've got something here. So it goes back to even this talking about mentorship and sponsorship and believing in each other as women and lifting each other up along the way. That is also very important. But also, how do we put our people and women in front of the right people to actually open up the doors? And that's basically the summary of how to answer your question, but it would be really amiss of me if, as an organization, representing organizations that play a very big advocacy role, to say, I mean, we are in an election year, and I'm not a politician or anything, but as business owners, as South Africans, sometimes we forget that in our spaces wanting to be business owners and businesswomen, we forget that there's an active citizenry that must happen. That when you're talking about policy and legislation that actually equips us to be able to challenge some of the institutions that are supposed to be giving this funding to all of you and giving these opportunities to all of you. If we are not in the room when bills go out and we are asked to comment around what it is that needs to be changed here to cater for what the people of this country actually need, and especially the disadvantaged majority. When we go into parliament as organizations such as ABASA and the BBC and the BMF, people are not there. The very people are going to say there's no access to funding, we're not getting opportunities. You don't have to wait for an organization to represent you. You can go as an individual and submit your comments. So I think it's important, as I close, to say, over and above everything that we expect from our country and our government and the people that can actually give us all the things we're asking for, we also have a big role to play in using our voices and being active in our country.
100%. Perfect. I'll keep the microphone with you for the moment. I am aware that we are running out of time, and I do want us to ensure that we have our tea break at least between 11:20, 11:30, just before 12. And I'm keen for us just to evaluate any questions that we might have on the floor. Bear in mind that there will be a panel discussion which will build up on some of the themes around bureaucracy and legislation and other challenges that have been highlighted on the panel. I saw so many hands shoot up. If I don't get to you, please know it's nothing personal. It's just about the interest of time and keeping the questions as short as possible. I noted your hand with the black jacket, ma'am, yourself as well with the green shirt. I want to be fair. Who else should I go to? David, help. This side. We haven't gone that far, though. 1, 2. Okay, we'll go to the lady in the corner. We're also trying to work in terms of logistics with the mic. Apologies. I did add a disclaimer. I promise it's not personal. I'm not too sure how many mics we've got on the floor. We'd like to take the questions. Fantastic. Ma'am, you in the black jacket. If you could keep your hand up as well, ma'am, in the green shirt and the white shirt right in that corner. Please keep your question as short, as sharp as possible.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much for your time. So I'm Dr. Pat Magani.
It's still on mute, so we're going to... But I heard you were Dr. Pat
Can you hear me
Mangani.
now?
Loud and clear.
Yes, I'm a candidate attorney, and I've got a special interest in property development and residential developments, as well as working with construction companies. My question is actually to Tshepiso regarding private equities. I understand that you've got different funds which have got different mandates. So my question to you is, how do I then know which fund is actually suitable to my business needs? And how do I also access the right person within the fund to actually allow them to consider engaging with the property developers and construction companies that we work with?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your question. We'll take the other question. Ma'am, if you could please stand so the mic gets to you. And your hand in the corner has been noted as well.
Sanmanan, I think for me, the question is, most of the time when we engage with entrepreneurs, we engage with them from a point of beneficiaries. But actually, entrepreneurs are partners. And as we start thinking around solutions for entrepreneurs, I'd like to understand, how do organizations engage with entrepreneurs from a partnership perspective to say, you are the visionary founder of this business. You are the one on the ground doing the work. So how do we bring in our resources, finances, and all these other things, and you bring in the idea, and collectively we work together to solve whatever problem? How do we engage, and not just from a beneficiary perspective, but from a partner perspective?
100%. Siyabonga Sispoliswa. Really appreciate it. Your hand was up in the corner, ma'am. We'll take your questions. And from there, we'll get responses from the panel, as well as closing remarks to shift the conversation forward.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? I'm on, hey?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, it's Vani Pillay from Oaktree. We work with entrepreneurs to help develop them and hopefully create an ecosystem that they could belong. I've got 2 questions. I'll try and be as quick as possible.
Please, can we have one in the interest of time?
Okay.
Thank you.
The most important one then.
Yes.
Thank you to the panelists. I had a lot of answers to some of my questions, but there is one that is troubling me at the moment, and perhaps I can direct it to the panelist from SEFA. We launched the Ignite Summit last year, and one of the things we hear consistently, there is funding available. But of course, we know that, and this number can be contested, it's 294 billion funding gap that does exist. There is pockets of excellence. I mean, you said yourself, it's 3.6 billion that we've managed to share, and that's an accolade. But there are pockets of excellence, and we struggle to find a collaborative platform to almost create traction to galvanize. So let me give you an example to get specific. Last year when we had the panel from SEFA, 2 things they raised. One is that people don't get funds because they're not funding ready.
Sure.
So, of course, we have got vehicles to create funding readiness, and I suspect a lot of my colleagues in the room have got those vehicles. There is funding readiness. And the second part of it is that because of their lack of ability, and you mentioned marketing ability, communication, finance, etc., there are programs that various colleagues, including myself, that have available to make them funding ready and then bring them to SEFA. So if the SEDA-SEFA collaboration is not working as efficiently, and we are here to collaborate with you, and I again, cite one of the panelists that said, let's work collaboratively.
Sure.
Why is that not happening? Sorry, and then since that time, I've tried to access the speakers to help collaborate with us to support the needs of these entrepreneurs. And of course, we have got no feedback. So I just wanted to give you a practical example to say we are desperate, we want to work, we want to partner, so
Ms.
be
Pillay,
with us.
hear you loud and clear. How do
Thank
we
you.
partner? Get in touch. Please reach out. There is an opportunity for support there. Perhaps let's start where the microphone is with yourself, Tshepiso. So very clear question from Dr. Mangwangi regarding opportunities in terms of identifying the right funds within the property investment space, because that is a key area of interest for her, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I want to actually start off by prefacing my answer by saying primarily private equity and VC will invest in businesses rather than projects. So that's normally the sweet spot for them. That being said, though, we are seeing, for example, within our member base, a number of funds that are property funds. So you'll get, for example, funds that do just commercial property, but focusing largely on township malls. We've got fund managers who are focusing on social housing. So you do have those types of fund managers that have that focus. And to a large extent, you'll find that those fund managers that do that are the ones that identify themselves as impact investors. So I think that would be one way of sifting through the noise, because when you go on our website, you're going to find like 200 members, and then you must find a way to kind of hone in on the ones that are important to you. So I would say impact investors are particularly important because they're the ones who then tend to focus on social sectors such as housing, education, hospitals, etc. What I would also say is that when you go on the websites for all our fund managers, they'll actually tell you what investments they've made. So you're also able to see which projects have they invested in, who is in their investment teams, and that gives you a sense of what their appetite is as well, so that by the time you engage with them, you already have structured your narrative based on what you've gathered about where they've invested, at what stage, size of projects they're looking at, etc. I also think what's also important for perhaps everybody else in the room is to keep an eye out, particularly for gender lens investing fund managers, because they're the ones who actually are investing with a specific focus on women. So they're particularly important, and I think they're an important audience for everyone to just keep in mind.
100%. Thank you for that. Mr. Morobe, if I can give you Koliswa's question in terms of approaching and speaking and working with entrepreneurs as partners, and maybe we can underscore this by understanding the roles and responsibilities of both as we come together. Because the truth is the entrepreneurs are the innovators, as she says, who are driving the growth of the economy. As funders and financiers, we're really there to support.
100%, and thank you for that question. I think that's precisely the intention behind this symposium. You recall that I mentioned in the beginning that we, as an ecosystem player, one of the major ones in the country, we need to leverage not only our resources, but our relationship with entrepreneurs, with other funders, with other industry players, as well as policymakers to explore solutions that are for the benefit of entrepreneurs. We could sit in our offices and determine what is good for women entrepreneurs, but I think it's important for us here to be here in the room here.
Can I push you further?
Please do.
And ask you, in the interest of Koliswa's question as well, when an entrepreneur like Koliswa, like Erica, or anyone else sits down opposite your investment team or members at business partners offices, how should they prepare to approach that conversation, and how does business partners also approach it to make sure it is a clear partnership between the two of you? Yeah, that's what she wants to know.
Is that what you want to know?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we've got good success stories here of entrepreneurs who have been able to succeed, to get access to the finance. And I think here, without handing over a rugby pass, but I thought Erica is one of the entrepreneurs that succeeded, because I shared a few questions of what we want to hear from you as you approach us as an entrepreneur. What do you need the money for? Is it a short-term or long-term need? These are, for me, important part of conversation. You've come up with something maybe innovative. We not so big on seed capital. So there are funders that are stronger players where you are still at a seed level of your business. But if we want to, at a stage where you have started your business, you are able to give us some kind of traction that you have in the market at a level where you need to grow further. That makes for a good conversation with us at Business Partners.
Gotcha.
So I've got Megan, one of my colleagues. I don't want to eat too much time, but she will share some of the chatting to the entrepreneurs.
Perfect. Megan can share some insight very briefly because she will be on our next panel actually. So maybe let's save the juice for then, because then we have Megan and Erica who will be able to share some perspective there as we do address the next question and have Linda add some sentiment and commentary there.
Yeah, I see my male colleague was struggling with that answer, so I want to chip in and say, I love your question. And if you want to be treated as a partner, you need to show up as a partner.
Yeah.
And I think when I was listening to your question, for me, I was like, the risk you run when you come in with just an idea and there's someone else giving you the money is your idea might be taken by the people that have the financial muscle. So you need an accountant, you need a lawyer. And you need to show up with that backing. And I know it's not easy because those things come and cost, but we need to find ways to support people with ideas, to protect their ideas from those that have money that can steal those ideas.
100%.
So show up as a partner if you want to treat it.
Perfect. Let's move the mic on to Sula. And I think that's really important to make sure that the partnership and the camaraderie is there, but both parties do need to make sure that they meet each other halfway to respond to the necessary needs and the risk that is also going to be taken to make sure that the rewards are also felt. So thank you for that. Ms. Pillay is eager, keen, ready, standing by to partner. So how do they find you? What partnership opportunities do you have and how do they get in touch?
Thank you. We have a gentleman called Mr. Don Marshall, who's responsible for the partnership programs. And I want to confirm that we've partnered with a lot of people. We've partnered with ABASA, Dunlop, OBC, different stakeholders. But I think what is key is what are you bringing to the table, like you said. It must be clear exactly what are we partnering on. This partnership must not be a vehicle for you to exploit SMMEs. Remember what a DFI, at the end, you must protect the interest of the SMMEs. So you can't say that you're partnering us, you're organizing an event, a SEFA speaker must come on board, you are making the SMEs to pay. So it must be that collaboration where we see that SMEs are directly benefiting. I must also mention that we've also seen, terrible things where people are really exploiting our people with these partnerships. Currently, in some instances, we also do some due diligence on the partner, to see that are they the right partner. Recently, we're trying to partner with another company, and while we're doing DD on them, we find that they are in areas on the account with some company 1 million, and they want to facilitate funding to other SMMEs. And those are things that when we assess the type of partnership, we look at the complete picture and see, is this really going to benefit our community, or is it going to benefit an individual who's hiding behind, SMMEs? But I also need to brag about it. As SEFA, we're not a security-based lender, meaning that we fund SMMEs without collateral.
Say that louder for everyone else to hear. We didn't hear any applause.
We are not a security-based lender.
Yes.
We're funding SMMEs without collateral, but if you have the collateral, we'll demand the collateral, but we'll never detail your application because you don't have the collateral. If the concept is viable, you can prove the cash flow for it, we will fund the concept.
100%. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running out of time as we have moved over slightly in terms of the running of the program, but I do think that there's some key concepts to remember and to bear in mind that have been mentioned by all of our panelists here today. Firstly, funding is available. The capital is there, whether you go to a bank, a financier, private equity, working with industry bodies, or perhaps with government development finance institutions. What you do need to ensure, as David highlighted, is to make sure you come to the table prepared. It has been mentioned to understand the kind of funding that you need, where you are in your growth stage as a business, how long you actually need that particular funding for, and of course, the kind of risk that you're willing to take on in terms of what you're willing to give up for that funding. If you don't have any collateral, there are alternatives available in the market through different funding institutions who will have very different requirements. Should you look at further partnerships in terms of having supporters on board in the form of equity, that also exists, especially if you're operating in spaces that might be unique, nuanced, speaking as to how best we can leverage off of technology and build up on high growth businesses. Most importantly, many of you here in the room are professionals in your own space. Find yourself peers and colleagues through industry recognized bodies to assist you in the journey, to point you in the right direction, and of course leverage off of the group partnerships and opportunities that you're able to collaborate on to ensure that there's adequate scale on that level. Fundamentally, I do think that as South Africans and through the institutions that have been represented here on stage and many others that we are aware of that are in the market, they are able to ensure that they can unlock that capital. Preparedness, preparation, and understanding what the capital is going to be used for is part of the secret sauce that will make it easier for you to unlock some of these doors. But on that note, we'll leave it there for today. We truly appreciate the insight that has been shared by this panel. I do want to whet your appetite and intrigue your interest with our follow-up panel, where we will be hearing from entrepreneurs at business partners who have been supported by business partners, working in very unique fields, who have been able to find growth, sustainability, and scale as to what their experience has been. We'll also find out from key players such as the capital markets institutions as to how best they're plugging in the gap to make sure that whilst an IPO might not be your goal and objective right now, but they are organizing and assisting entrepreneurs through their growth. We'll also find out, most importantly, that remember, we live in a country like South Africa. Unemployment is still incredibly high, and unemployment affects majority of us here in the room. Women, and even more so if you happen to be a black South African woman or one of color. So that essentially does speak to the social development. It's one thing to be the CEO at the top and at the helm and the first woman pioneering industries, but you need to make sure that you pay it forward and employ and bring others along, not only within your organization, but the communities that you serve as well.